US rare earth checkmate, Ukraine peace deal close. Hi everyone and welcome to Ainslie Insights, brought to you by Ainslie Bullion, Ainslie Crypto and the Gold and Silver Standard. Today, welcome back Alex, who's been looking more closely at what's going on in the Ukraine or in the Ukraine deal, the carving up potentially. I don't know, a little bit interesting. There's a few different ways to look at this. How are you going today, Alex?
I'm going well. How are you?
I'm very well. Look, I've been looking into your work around this analysis, and it's very interesting. It's not looking particularly good if you're Ukraine in this situation, because it feels like there's a bit of a carve up going on if we are close to a peace deal where maybe they don't really get a whole lot I mean, obviously peace is significant that they're getting there, but some of those initial objectives seem to be not really on the table anymore. Can you talk us through what's going on?
Well, I mean, 3 years, the war's been going on for 3 years now. And Ukraine, I mean, Zelensky got up the other day and said they've lost 46,000 troops. I'm not sure anyone believes that. And, you know, numerous people missing in action or prisoners. So, you know, on reading things, it looks like about 1 million to 2 million people potentially dead. That's civilians, Russians, and soldiers. And all that Russia wanted initially was Ukraine not to join NATO. And the deal that looks like it's being struck is not only do they not join NATO, they have all a lot of people, which is horrific. They're going to lose land to Russia, and then they're giving up mineral rights to the US. So they've got to repay all these loans for the war, which, you know, Zelensky claims he only got 100 billion. The US says we gave you 200 billion, and now they're giving up 500 billion in mineral rights. So it seems like lose, lose, lose for Ukraine. And it's for what?
Well, on the other side of that, I suppose there's some win-win winners in that scenario. And you particularly highlight this US win here when we're talking about rare earths. And I think that is an area that people may not have been paying as close enough attention to. We know a lot of these other wars that happened in the Middle East were around oil originally. Now is the rare earths complex, or the fact that people need these rare earth metals in a whole lot of electronics and other areas, is that the new oil in the modern world? And the US stands to potentially gain quite a bit here.
Yeah, well, I mean, we know that with green energy, lithium became a bit of a boom metal, and that's kind of fallen over. But we're now coming into an AI boom, and people are going to need robots, and people are going to need more phones and more computers, and rare earths are important for all of those items. And China has 40 million tons and the US has 1.5 million tons. So in what could potentially be the new gold rush or oil rush, the US is lacking. So Ukraine, which we all knew was the food bowl of Europe with all the wheat and great farming land, what people probably may not have known is all the rare earths that they have. So the main countries with most of the rare earths is, I think China has about 40 million tons. Brazil and Vietnam have sort of around 20 million. Australia only has 5 million. And Ukraine and Russia have, I think, similar numbers or more than Australia. So they're a good spot to try and catch up on things, although maybe Brazil was closer to home. But the US has now grabbed something that they need in the future. Like Trump's putting tariffs on everyone and trying to get copper and all the minerals that they're deficient of. And this is a big one, and it's a big win for the US.
The other part of this that is catching my attention is it's a big win for Russia, obviously from the war perspective, but also potentially from the deals that seem to be getting struck here with the US. I found that quite surprising. I'm still trying to process that. You made the point to me earlier that, you know, we don't know that a deal is necessarily being agreed to yet, particularly from the US's side, but there's a lot of talk around it, and there's certainly a lot of positive rhetoric around Russia coming out of the Trump administration, that's for sure. Certainly much more positive than what we've seen for a very long time. How do you interpret that? Because this could be a big shift in terms of what the power structure was before, particularly around BRICS, because to me, it was like you had all of these countries banding together to be a competitive force to the US, Russia sort of leading that in many ways. And if now they're pivoting a little bit towards the US, that's a very different dynamic.
Well, I mean, it's interesting. We were speaking about OPEC before and how the US has kneecapped OPEC basically by now being the biggest producer of oil in the world. So, you used to hear on the news, oh no, OPEC's cutting production, oil prices are going up. You just don't hear it anymore because it's still significant, but it's not as significant. Now, BRICS is the other sort of united body that goes, that's sort of been the opposite to America, the anti-Western kind of union. And they include Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Now, when the US got this deal closer with Ukraine, Putin actually just put his hand up and say, hey, how about you take some aluminium off me? We'll provide you 2 million tons of aluminium a year. And on top of that, we've got more rare earths in Ukraine. So why don't we do that deal instead? So we can do some joint exploration instead of Ukraine. Now, when you look at BRICS hold most of the rare earths. So Russia separating from BRICS really takes some power dynamic away from the BRICS union. And we all know through the war that China and India have been trading with Russia. They've sort of been ignoring the sanctions. Maybe not, what they say, what they do, different things. But so Russia splitting from this really splits that alliance that's been going on for years. And whether or not the US takes the deal or not, it certainly throws a new world order in the balance.
And I wonder, like I've been making this argument in my sort of circles that the problem with a trade war is the assumptions at the start of that trade war are that the dominant player is going to win. Now, that was the same in the Ukraine war, in a hot war where you went, well, Russia had the bigger troops, was likely to win. It turns out in the end they probably will, but we covered a lot of ground between then and now, right? And that's the problem with any war. You don't really know the outcome. This could be the first one of those zigs and zags that we experience where you go, well, it didn't quite turn out the way that we were expecting, because it could be a situation where the old allies are no longer the key players in this, and you've got new allegiances forming and new trade partnerships forming. So I think a lot of people who were potentially cheering on the idea of, this will be great because finally, we'll put the US where it needs to be, like they might be right in the US from the US's perspective, but it could be a very different story for everyone else. I mean, for Australia, for example, we could be in a very good position. We could be in a very bad position. It probably depends on which side we align with and which side ends up winning in this.
I think Australia, as much as I don't like any of this, I think Australia, because we actually have rare earths, might be okay. I wouldn't say we're, doing what Russia's doing, which is really shifting things, but we still have our commodities, but it depends how we use them, because we've used gas pretty poorly. We've used iron ore pretty poorly. So, kudos to a government that actually does something right, but we'll see if that ever happens. But, Canada doesn't have the rare earths, and, they're being touted as the 51st state. So, like the Anzacs, I guess, we've always been with New Zealand and we fought with them. Well, that's what happened with America and Canada, and there's nothing being given for it. And Russia's got rare earths and they're being given more airtime and more respect than perhaps Canada, which is, just insane. So, it will be interesting to see what it looks like. But to me, it looks like commodities and what you have is worth more than history now.
And that will be very challenging for a lot of people, because any sort of regime shift of this magnitude will rock a lot of people and a lot of traditional markets, which probably brings me to my final question. How does gold fit into all of this? Because something that's been playing in my mind is I've tended to look at the BRICS accumulation of gold as a countermeasure to the US's gold holdings. And we know over the last couple of years that they've now surpassed the holdings collectively surpass the holdings of the US. Well, depending on what we see out of that audit of Fort Knox, but in theory, right? So then when I was looking at that as really, it was a move to protect themselves. But
to be against the US dollar, right? So it became
absolutely
for the US dollar.
But I wonder now if we do see this world order shift that seems to be potentially unfolding that you were describing here. Does it change if all of the major players in that have been accumulating a lot of gold? Is this a very subtle, maybe not so subtle, behind the scenes re-emergence of something resembling a gold standard? How do you think about that?
Well, I mean, this amount of gold that we're seeing moving to the US, which is, 30 to 50 tons a day, whether or not that's refilling Fort Knox or whether or not that is getting ready for some quasi-gold, quasi-USD, to me, like, it kind of looks like that. The US was not collecting gold, and all of a sudden they are. And Australia, which has all that gold and so many mints, still has less gold than Venezuela. So good for us.
Well, it's certainly very interesting, and as always, appreciate your digging into that. I know there'll be a lot of sort of controversy, but that's the thing. We're going to have a lot of controversy through this whole period of time because there are going to be people who have very strong political beliefs. There's going to be people who are very, very anti-Russia, full stop. There are going to be people who are quite pro-Russia. It's been a long time, there's a lot of history, a lot of water under the bridge, as they say in these scenarios. So it's going to be very interesting. But one thing for sure is that it appears, at least at the moment, that gold is taking advantage of this.
Yeah, I think gold will continue to take advantage of this. And I think people need to remember as well, whether you're anti-Trump or pro-Trump or anti-Russia or pro-Russia, is the truth is usually somewhere in the middle, number one. And number two, there was some laws that were I think it got passed through the Senate in the US yesterday, no tax on tips, no tax on overtime. I think that's a phenomenal policy. In Australia, people working hard seems to be becoming a rarity. Encouraging people that want to work to do that is awesome. It is a Trump policy. If you don't like Trump, it doesn't mean it's a bad policy. So, yeah, if everyone can stop painting everything in black and white and look at some positives and negatives that come out of everywhere, maybe the world might be a nicer place.
Some sage words to end on there. Thank you so much for that today, Alex. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, everyone, for watching. We'll chat again soon.